A drive to Fayetteville, West Virginia, is nothing short of exciting. The winding road winds past the dark grove of platanas and ash trees clinging to the steep Appalachia stairs. Around the corner, near the Hawk's Nest community, is the Mystery Hall, an Americana's cheesy roadside relic. Once in Fayetteville itself, cross the impressive New River Gorge Bridge, a 3,030-foot steel arch that straddles the cold waters of New River. But for decades, travelers who came to Fayetteville were treated in a much darker place, seeking pictures of 5 lost Sodder children and news of their fate. The official description of the disappearance of the Sodder children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, Betty, ages 5 to 14, is a fire that burned down the Sodder family on Christmas Eve in 1945. According to the Sodders' parents, the children who survived the fire were kidnapped by an active network of amateur sleuths in retaliation for their families. George and Jennie Sodder were both Italian immigrants, but only George, who immigrated at the age of 13, spent a considerable amount of time in his home country. The couple was a brilliant example of the American dream. George moved from the Pennsylvania Railroad to own a small truck company in West Virginia. He and his wife had 10 children and lived in a 2-story house north of Fayetteville, where many Italian immigrants and their descendants settled. George was a diligent and devoted family member, but he never hesitated to share his beliefs. He frequently talked about the disapproval of fascist dictator Benito Mussolini. It was regarded by pre-World War II Italian Americans as a model of strength that made Italy great again. Quarrels with other Italian Americans were common, and the family claimed that George was a threat. In 1945, the family celebrated with 9 out of 10 children. The war was over, which meant that his eldest son, Joe, would soon return from the army. Her daughter Marion bought a gift for the youngest Sodder brothers with income from her new job. At night, 5 of the Sodder children retired to sleep in the attic on the 2nd floor. Around 1 a.m. at midnight, Jennie Sodder woke up and hit the roof, followed by a swelling sound. She fell asleep again, but 30 minutes later she woke up with the smell of smoke. It didn't take long for her to find a burning fire in the fuse box in George's office. The Christmas lights were still twinkling downstairs in the living room, and the kids were still sleeping in the attic. George, Jennie, Marion, 2-year-old Sylvia and 2 older Sodder boys escaped their home. One of those boys, John Sodder, first claimed that he went upstairs to wake his brother. He later changed his account and said he had just called to him. The fire could not have happened at a worse time. It was in the middle of the night at Christmas. The city of Fayetteville has been closed. Many local men were still in the army and the fire department was sparsely staffed. In addition, a series of mysterious accidents made rescue impossible. The tall ladder that was normally stored on the outer wall is gone. The water in the water barrel froze and the phone line went down. George Sodder tried to park his truck under the skylight, climb the roof and save the children. However, although the engine worked well at the beginning of the week, it did not start. Desperately, George climbed the wall, pried open the skylight, and cut his arm in the process. Still, he couldn't get to the bedroom upstairs. Sadly, the Sodders saw their home and their adopted 5 children did not arrive till 8 o'clock the next morning. Reason for the delay? Fayetteville's fire chief, F.J. Morris, who couldn't drive his very own Branch S truck. A cursory 2-hour exam ensued, despite the fact that fire investigations regularly lasted days, or maybe weeks. No bones have been discovered, and the Sodders have been advised their youngsters have to have burned away completely. Later, George Sodder, not able to bear the sight of his ruined home, used a bulldozer to bury what remained below 5 feet of dirt in the approaching weeks. The Sodders believed their youngsters had, in fact, been kidnapped, possibly through mafia members, who resented George's anti-Mussolini rants. The missing ladder was later discovered tossed into a close-by ravine. Investigators concluded the fire was caused by defective wiring, despite the fact that George had an electrician rewire the residence and the Christmas lighting remained on as the fire burned. A lodge owner claimed to have hosted unusual lodgers touring with a bunch of youngsters. After speaking to a nearby crematorium employee, Jennie Sodder decided there was no way the youngsters' bones might have been incinerated. The Sodders hired a private investigator, who soon unearthed a shocking lead. Fayetteville's fire chief F.J. Morris had apparently found a heart among the ashes of the house. He secretly packed the heart into a box and then buried it. The tip was initially confessed to a minister, who confirmed the account to George Sodder. When confronted with the accusation, Morris admitted to the story. He took Sodder to the spot where he buried the remains. Indeed, a box was buried in the ground with some flesh inside, but a local funeral director declared it was fresh beef liver that had never been exposed to this bizarre twist as evidence that Morris was indeed trying to convince the Sodders that their children had died in the fire, throwing them off of the youngsters' true fate. In a sense, the theory may be true. Morris may have been trying to convince the Sodders that their children died that night. But it wasn't because he was covering up a kidnapping. Rather, he was covering up his own incompetence. By the chief's own admission, he could not drive his department's fire truck. The short 2-hour investigation on Christmas morning was hardly adequate. And George Sodder may well have buried the Sodder children's remains too deeply when he bulldozed dirt over the smoldering ruins of the house. The Sodders themselves never abandoned the theory that their children had been kidnapped. Billboards and advertisements asked after their fates. In 1967, a photo was sent to the Sodders, claiming to portray a now-grown Louis, although this may have been a cruel trick played on a family whose tragic story had by then become national news. Although multiple follow-ups on various tips have yielded little to no developments, the kidnapping theory lingers to this day and no answers were ever given to the fate of those poor children.